All right. Hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to our webinar, Forecasting Best Practices for Resource Management. My name is Nora, and I'm excited to be your lead webinar host today. As a new work and transformation consultant, I'm very passionate about unleashing the potential of organizations and people by creating more adaptive, soulful, and joyful ways of working. My mission is to inspire new ways of thinking, working, and being. And I'm so thrilled to guide you through today's discussion on forecasting. And before we kick off, I would love to get a sense for who's with us here today. We've got a full house. Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to have you here. So we have prepared a little poll, which I'm going to launch right now. So feel free to give us some insights into A, are you currently doing any capacity forecasting? And B, how accurate do you think capacity forecasting, the process you're using right now, is? So I can already see answers coming in, which is super interesting. So the picture that is forming is around the vast majority of you all is using forecasting regularly. 26 out of 40 responses, 65%. And we've got moderately accurate as the majority. So 75% of you think it's accurate, moderately. So thank you very much for giving us a little bit of feedback. Always nice to see how this topic relates with you and your life. So hopefully we can use this webinar to increase that number so that we have some insights and takeaways that will make your accuracy even better in the future. This webinar is part of RUN's webinar program called LEAP, Igniting the Future of Resource Management. With this program, our goal is to reinvent the traditional approach to resource management and unpack fresh and inspiring perspectives for the resource management community on how this future could look like. And over the past year, we have started to build what I find is a treasure box of insights and valuable resources. So to anyone who's dialing in today, feel free to check out all the other webinars that have been happening. There are over 13 of them on our website. So maybe you find some interesting inspiration there as well. This webinar is brought to you by RUN. RUN offers a resource management software solving the very challenge of matching work to be done and finding the best suited people for the job. For your information, we will be using the last 15-20 minutes for any questions and answers from you. So please feel free, as you're listening along, as we explore this topic of forecasting, to capture any questions that might pop up in the Q&A section of Zoom webinar. Also, feel free to use the chat to share any thoughts. It's always super nice for us as we're having our conversation to get a little bit of resonance. Also, feel free to use any reactions that Zoom offers. It just makes it a bit more lively and interactive. Next up, I would love to introduce to you our two wonderful panelists, Lisa Parisella and Julie McKelvey. We're excited to have Lisa with us today, Head of Customer Success at RUN and an absolute forecasting enthusiast. With over 20 years of hands-on experience, Lisa is a true pro at project and change management. She's all about cracking the code on capacity planning and resource management to boost both project outcomes and team happiness. Lisa, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the webinar.
Thanks so much for having me, Nora.
Awesome. And next, we warmly welcome Julie. Julie is our powerhouse global resource manager from Ohio. She brings top-notch skills in workforce optimization and team dynamics, backed by a track record of having worked at big names like Advantive, Mission Cloud, App Dynamics. Julie has also set up 2 resource management offices from scratch. So Julie, we're so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Nora. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So what we'll cover in our webinar today is we will define First of all, what do we mean by forecasting? We will understand why forecasting is so critical. We'll look into forecasting best practices. This is really the majority of our conversation. We will identify some key challenges and how to overcome them in the space of forecasting. And if we have some time, we will look at forecasting future trends. So without further ado, let's kick right into things. Lisa, what precisely does forecasting mean in the world of resource management?
It's a great question, Nora. I think a lot, I mean, obviously in a very simplistic way, it's predicting your future resourcing needs, right? So I think we all understand that that's what forecasting is, but there's a lot more complexity in resource management forecasting, because it's not just looking at, will you have enough capacity to meet all of the demand that your sales team and your internal projects are bringing in, but what does it, do you have the right actual supply? Do you have the right people with the right skill sets? It's also predicting the finances of this as well. Are you taking on the projects that are driving more value to your company, that are bringing in more money, that are giving you the margins that you're looking for? And also, just on a very basic level, forecasting is also about understanding what composes of your workforce. Is it more full-time employees? Is it contractors? Is it part-timers? Is it another type of employee? So it's a much more cohesive picture at looking at what your organization actually needs to deliver and become sort of an efficient machine in delivering these projects.
Beautiful. Thank you for kicking us off. Julie, how do you grasp the topic of forecasting?
Sure. I think it's all of the things that Lisa said. I think the other thing is forecasting reaches well beyond just resource allocation, right? It reaches well beyond skills. It really impacts so many areas within an organization. So to make sure that you're doing it as accurate as you can get it, and that you're looking at all of the different pieces that are needed to do accurate forecasting is really just key to running a successful RMO.
Love it. Thank you so much for laying the foundation of this conversation, which will now unfold. So, Lisa, why do you think forecasting is so critical for resource management and the organization?
Resource management obviously key component. Everyone does resource management in companies, whether they know they do it or not, they're still always doing it. And the same can kind of be said about forecasting, right? Everyone's kind of forecasting, but are they doing it in a targeted and sort of powerful way? That's a different question. A really targeted approach to forecasting can really transform your business and can really drive efficiency and employee happiness, something that I'm sort of passionate about. Often people are going to be forecasting what I call blind forecasting, which they'll sort of look at, the billable hours they did last year, apply a growth percentage, and assume that they'll maybe need this much in the future. But rather than looking at what they actually need, they may make some sort of poor hiring decisions. They may shift people in projects where they have no interest in working in those projects, have the right skill set. So when you're looking at forecasting and resource management, having clarity and understanding what people are actually working on, what skills they have to make those projects function and sort of deliver at those timelines that are expected is really, really important. Because if not, you're really just sort of guessing what you'll need. And, we all make assumptions, and we all know what assumptions mean, right? At the end of the day, assumptions are not necessarily going to bring you as much value as you could.
Absolutely. Agree. Julie, from your perspective, also having been a resource manager in different organizations, what else have you seen as the value of good forecasting?
Sure. I think one of the things that happens that you don't really see when you're in that reactive state, which a lot of times resource management is operating within a reactive state, is how many things that can break by making a bad allocation, making a bad assignment, really making sure that those skills do match up. So you are aligning the right person with the right project. I think everything is based on billable utilization, right? Companies are there to make money. And by doing this accurately and by making sure you have that great foundation, you're maximizing your resources. You're getting them the maximum utilization. You're doing what's right for them, and you're doing what's right for the company.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and sorry, just to add to Julie's point, she nailed it. At the end of the day, if you are not really forecasting appropriately or doing sort of targeted forecasting, you're losing money like that. And the simplest way, you're losing money, right?
So I'm curious, Julie, if you could share an example with us of where you've seen inaccurate forecasting and or the ability to forecast correctly and an impact that had on the organization.
Sure. So going in and building an RMO, you're coming into a place that obviously has been running projects, but not necessarily do they have any process in place, or they're not necessarily doing things in the most efficient way. So one of the things that happens is as you start to build out your RMO, or even if you have an RMO, right, and you're trying to level up what you're doing, you really have to look at that and say, okay, where are my misses? One of the things that I've seen very commonly happen is it's kind of, we always called it backdoor resourcing, where you're assigning someone to a project, but it never really makes its way to resource management. So there's no allocation for it, right? There's really no one else involved between maybe that technical resource and their manager making that decision. So now this person starts working on this project, okay? And all of their other projects kind of fall to the wayside. But what about that customer experience? What about those deliveries? Those are just as important. And you've probably already had someone in the form of a project manager make a commitment to those customers. Hey, we're going to get these tasks done for you this week. So it really, when you look at kind of going rogue and doing backdoor resourcing, it throws everything off. And not just from customer and technical resource and project management perspective, it also throws off your revenue forecasting. Because chances are you have someone on an operations team that's trying to forecast revenue based off of allocations in many cases. So now you're impacting multiple departments by doing that.
Yeah, the backdoor resourcing. Definitely a big
Yes.
challenge. Lisa, I'm curious if you could share a concrete example or a story of how effective and well done forecasting has had an impact.
Oh, absolutely. And obviously there's lots of different customers that have come to us and sort of had this problem of, yes, we're forecasting, we think we've got it right, and then all of a sudden the projects are starting to slip and they're starting to wonder, why is this happening? One of our larger clients once told me a story of like previously to using Run, where they had sort of said, we had a really great big project come in, tight deadline, 3 months, and we sort of snuck it into our resourcing plan, and we were pretty confident. It's 1,200 hours. We knew we needed, our engineers are full-time. We needed 10 engineers, 40 hours, we're going to be fine. And they were like, we were convinced there was, we put in a little bit of buffer, but we were pretty sure we were going to deliver. They started the project and it slowly started to slip and slip and slip. And then within about 2 months in, they were sure now that they weren't going to meet any of their deliverables. It was going to have to be extended by 2 more months. And when they were like, we just didn't understand. We had the resources, we had the schedules, we had done a project like this before, so it wasn't an estimation problem. What went wrong? And when they looked at it, they realized that of those 10 engineers, several of them actually had time off booked during that 3 months. There was public holidays. Also, they had some that were not necessarily as skilled in that specific type of project, right? So they were either more junior or intermediate. So they had made a lot of basing on like, hey, it's just we need 1,200 hours. We have 1,200 hours. Demand and supply are meeting each other perfectly. But that's not true. Reality is resourcing is people, and there's real life situations. At the end of the day, when they finished the project, which was 2 months delayed, they looked at it. And in reality, those 3 months, they only had 880 hours actually of capacity. So they had started the project already 400 hours behind. So there was no way they were going to deliver. And so they sort of started saying, and the problem with this is this had a huge cascading effect on all of their other projects, because those engineers were already scheduled to start on something else. And now all of a sudden those projects couldn't start. Very much like Julie said, clients were upset. Leadership is asking what happened? Why didn't you, why is an HR is being told you need to hire faster? All of a sudden the entire sort of situation starts to sort of slip. And so you're sort of seeing it. So the way they sort of fix that is by actually, sort of implementing a more centralized way of doing resource management, right? And using a tool, in this case, Run, but any really sort of tool that allows you to see the resource management, to see what people are working on, to see not just what's confirmed, but potential projects, to have skills matrices. So by having sort of a much cleaner, clear picture of what everybody's working on, if they had been using a tool like Run, they would have seen that the time off would have been affected. They would have seen that the wrong people were on this project to deliver. So once they implemented a more centralized way, so they had, much like Julie, they didn't actually have an RMO. They were starting to build this out. They saw the importance of this. And once they sort of implemented that and used the tool, they suddenly were able to sort of see a vast improvement in their delivery times as well. Sure, there's always going to be a little bit of slippage, but all of a sudden they went from like 2 to 3 month delays to like a couple of days of delay. So big improvement for them.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that very concrete example. It's always interesting to look at the real life and what unfolds there. So with that, you already touched a little bit on best practices. Let's dive right into the heart of our topic, which is best practices when it comes to forecasting. So Julie, from your vast experience, having done resource management for over 5 years now, what would you like to share from your experience? What are some of the best practices? What can people take away from today's conversation?
Build the foundation, invest the time, right? Get those solid pieces that you're going to use every day, right? A skills inventory, making sure that you have a skills inventory so you can align the right people, making sure you have a process to update your skills inventory, and constantly looking at that. One of the other things as a resource manager was I always said I lived in my resource planner, and constantly auditing that piece, looking to see who might be over allocated, who might be under allocated. When do these projects need to kick off? When are they going to end? Was there maybe a change to a kickoff date or an end date that's going to impact other projects? Really just the foundation of everything we do. I think having a centralized model is obviously all of our goals as resource managers, right? Because we know that that is the most effective way for all of these pieces to work together, but you might not get there right away. You might start with more of a hybrid model. So it's great communication with all of the stakeholders. It's making sure that you are having those regular interlocks and having a clear agenda for those interlocks to make sure that bookings are being updated, things are being communicated, and also including project managers and the technical resources in those pieces. Everyone really needs to be on the same page.
Nice. And just on that piece, on the interlocks, can you maybe share how you've done it in the past, like a cadence and maybe what's important when people want to reevaluate their communication strategy?
Sure. So for interlocks, primarily they're done with project managers because they truly are the ones running the projects. During that interlock, you should be looking at what projects they have. Do they have bookings in for all of those projects? Are the bookings for the duration of those projects? Are those projects on budget? Maybe their bookings send that project over budget, or maybe they're way under budget, which again, like we talked about, is going to just spread the impact through multiple departments. Really, one of the things that we always did was went through their projects and looked at who was assigned to those projects, talked about was the availability that they were asking for from that person something that person could deliver, and also any kind of escalations that came up. Maybe it looked like a skill match when we made the assignment, but once you get into the project, maybe the scope wasn't exactly what it should be, and we need something different. So do we need to split that allocation now? Do we need to just completely assign someone different? And all of those things should happen in the interlocks. And if it can't be solved there, you can go to the next level of that with an escalation meeting where you would get all of the stakeholders involved, right? Internal primarily. So maybe a delivery manager, your project manager, all of your technical people, and kind of make decisions as to what the right direction to go with that project is from there.
Amazing. So a lot about getting the foundations right, the skills inventory, maybe centralizing the way resource management is done, living in the resource planner, so really utilizing tooling effectively and you highlighted communication a lot, which I think is so important. And you gave us an example of how you've seen interlocks work very well. Thank you so much for kicking us off with best practices. Lisa, I know there's so much you want to share, so please enlighten us.
I think Julie did a good job of highlighting some that I find are pretty crucial. Obviously, communication is pretty key here. But to add to the foundations part, I think one of the biggest best practices that we sort of really highlight when you're implementing any type of software or just any RMO system is really about data. It's about getting the data in, right? So there has to be buy-in at the highest level, and that has to sort of flow down, that everybody has to understand that to forecast accurately, you need to know what you have. You need to understand what people are working on. You need to actually have proper resource management and the right data and the skills, the expertise, all of that kind of things needs to be in. And again, data isn't something that you put in and you forget about and you're done, right? Obviously, we all changes, and project priorities change all the time, and you have to be shifting things around on a really regular basis. And when you don't have data, clean data or good data hygiene in resource and project management, you're acting blind. You actually have no idea what the consequences are of moving people around, and whether you actually do have somebody that's being underutilized or has a specific skill set and could be swapped out from one project to the other to ensure both deliver at the same time. So what's really, really important is there has to be a commitment to keeping the data up to date all the time, right? This is something that have to live. They're logging into, like, I'm a project manager by trade. I log into my PM tool and then I log into my RM tool every single day. Because if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be able to really see what is going on and make the changes that are required to deliver on time. The first thing I would just highly encourage people is to understand that there has to be really a dedication to maintaining the data and making sure it's as clean, whether it's API integration. So invest in actually putting in an integration with your PM tools or whatever, or it's having a centralized source or people that are committed to going in and making sure things are being adjusted on a regular basis. So you're always getting an accurate real-time view of what your people are working on and what their skill sets are. So definitely I would say that was a big one. The other one is scenario planning. I don't think Julie touched on it, but I'm sure it connects a lot to what she was saying. Again, there's thousands of resources, thousands of skills, lots of things are going on. And at the end of the day, you are trying to sort of put this puzzle together to have the most efficient plan. And that requires a little bit of trial and error. And you don't want the trial and error to be live. You don't want the project that are going through this. So really investing in a tool that will support scenario planning is so crucial to make forecasting effective. Have a look, come up with a resourcing plan, shift teams, move them around, move different resources, look to see if you're going to hire an FTE, if you hire 5 FTEs, or is it, a couple of vendors? When are you going to hire those people? So scenario planning and sort of having a look at saying, we're going to bring in this project. Our sales team has committed to a specific timeline. Can we do it? Or alternately, the other direction, have the sales team look at the capacity and look and see, we can deliver this project, but we'll need to start it in 3 months for us to have the right capacity to deliver. So really trying different scenarios to make sure that you're being as most efficient as possible, but also you're not creating, roadblocks or a specific resource that might have a very specific skill set is being over allocated and it's going to stop all the different projects. You really have to look at the scenarios that could really affect your business.
100%. So on that note, I've been in the world of consulting, so I know how hard it is to actually know which of the projects are going to land, who will be available at that moment if it's landing, etc. So do you have some best practices or tips for resource managers out there, project managers out there? If we have this level of uncertainty, what's the approach? Like, is there a rule of thumb we can apply for this pipeline and our actual reality of what's going to manifest?
Well, it connects to scenario planning, right? Like when you look at scenario planning, you're obviously looking at your confirmed or your confirmed portfolio of projects that are currently going on in place. So, but obviously you have to factor in potential work. You can't just be like, well, so there has to be a sort of process in your own company where there's a trigger point where you are absolutely starting to resource this project before it comes to close. So sometimes some organizations, it'll be like a 60 or 70. And often what I recommend is when a sales or opportunity or project is starting, or even an internal project is coming in, you're kind of at 60, 70% probability that it's going to happen. Or alternately, it's a high impact project and it's maybe not sure that you're going to get it, but it's going to be high impact when it arrives. you really have to jump into your RM tool and start looking at what is that going to look like? If I do have to do this potential work, where are my capacity gaps? What am I going to have to shift to make sure that that actually delivers? So once again, I would recommend the minute you sort of see that project possibly coming into play, 70, 80%, you have to sort of do the resourcing plan for that project in a tentative mode. And then again, you can sort of try around and see. You're also going to be able to, it's also going to help you be able to see whether you actually do need to hire, right? So one of the other we didn't really touch on, and I think from an HR perspective, I have a very good friend who's a head of HR for a large company, and she says it's the bane of her existence because basically she'll suddenly get, the PMO will call and say, we need 5 project managers and 10 engineers by tomorrow, right? And she's always like, how could you knew these projects were coming. It takes 3 months to hire them. It takes 2 months to onboard them. We need leeway. We need a little bit of heads up before we can actually hire. So when you have sort of these potential projects, they should be factored into your resourcing plan so that your finance department understands there's going to be additional costs. So your HR department knows we need to kick off. We need to get that JD out there. It really arms the entire organization to make better decisions when you're not just planning for exactly that what is confirmed, but also what is coming or what is potentially going to come.
100%. Very well said. Thank you. Julie, from your experience, how can we navigate the scenario planning effectively and the uncertainty in the pipeline?
Sure. I think one of the other things to look at, in addition to everything that Lisa said, she's right on with, the order and all of the pieces. But I think you do need to also work with the sales team and really look at sales pipeline and start building those relationships, because they are going to have much better insight into that future planning than you might have. Generally in an RMO, you don't see that project until it's closed, right? And commitments have already been made to the customer. And it's true, there is a ramp up time, there is an onboarding time. You want to make sure if you're hiring people and you're hiring the right people. So really looking at sales pipeline and setting even guidelines, much like you do with your interlocks, much like you do with, how you build your allocations in whatever system you're using. There has to be some sort of outline you provide to sales with, here's the information I need. And I think when you're looking at capacity planning, there's several pieces of that you have to look at as well. So I was fortunate enough to get an automated capacity planning model in place. It takes a lot of the thought out of it, but it was fantastic. And some of it was based on what we know is happening right now. Some of it was based on historical data and averages, and some of it was based on sales pipeline. So capacity planning is always going to be our best guess, right? It's never going to be exactly, because all those things shift within a project, within the sales pipeline, within how things just play out as you move through that process. But I think all of those pieces actually kind of build the scenarios, and you can start duplicating those scenarios as well, based on what you know from previous experience. Capacity planning, we could do a whole nother webinar on that, right? But that certainly is a huge piece of what we need to look at when we're talking
Amazing.
about the accuracy.
Yeah. So touching on that. Yeah. Sorry, Lisa, you go.
Oh, sorry. No, she just brought up a great point about sort of duplicating. And I think one of the key parts just connects to that is that you also need to do trend analysis over the year.
Yes.
And one of the things that obviously I would encourage everyone to also add actuals, right? Because your best plans are not necessarily what actually happened. It's really important to see what you planned and what you actually delivered and how it went, so that the next project will be more efficient, right? But I think just implementing more sort of a retro, like we do this at Run, we do have retrospectives on our own resource planning and capacity planning. And we say, well, this was our best guess in January. How did we actually do? And we look at that in October and see, well, did we make the right choices? And that helps us get better and better as we go as well.
Oh, so powerful. So on that point of trend analysis, Lisa, do you have some like best practices on how to do that effectively? How can people listening in take that insight and make it actionable?
Absolutely. What I would say is I don't, different companies will have different processes for project retrospective. So some people don't do any project retrospective. Sometimes it's just a PMO function. what I would recommend is that if you are doing retrospectives, especially on big, complicated projects, there is not just a project perspective. You have to do a resource management as well to have a look at that component of the project. So I think it's really, really important. I think it's also really connected to a little bit of what Julie was saying with the interlocks. It's, every quarter or every half year, you should be having a retrospective or just a meeting on your overall resourcing basically plan and how it actually worked out. So you should always be sort of looking at this from an iterative approach, right? So this was our best guess. This is what we think we did. This is what happened. This is how we're going to get better at it next quarter, right? So really put that into place, making sure that resource management and capacity planning and forecasting isn't just sort of the ignored younger brother of project management. I always kind of see that.
Yes.
But it's such a crucial part of the delivery. I think worldwide, something like 60 or 70% of all projects fail to deliver on time and budget. It's pretty big statistic. And one of the key reasons is people are not forecasting what they actually need. And then they're not managing those resources. So understanding that and understanding that resource management is just as important as project management in many ways, and implementing processes in your company that really highlights that will make a world of difference.
100%. Beautifully said. So just for the sake of the audience, I would highly invite you to put any questions into the Q&A section, because this is your opportunity also to pick those two smart brains. So I would love to take your questions rather than mine. I have a few more in the pipeline, but I would definitely prioritize yours. So feel free to submit them. There is a Q&A section apart from the chat. So feel free to submit any questions there. Awesome. And Lisa, just on that point, you also mentioned something that resonated very much in one of our prep calls around templates. I think that is such a smart idea. When we see a pattern emerging for, let's say, we're in the consulting space and we're working in a certain type of industry, and that industry is always running differently than what we had forecasted, right? To have a look into that and then use a template when we have a new project landing in that industry. We already have a more accurate approach for this specific setup. Is there maybe some other things you want to share in that space?
No, I think you made a good point. I do love templates and I use them all the time. Different types of projects I have templates, and I associate financials to them as well. So it helps me predict what the margins will be right off the bat. So I think it's really important to sort of, I mean, obviously every project's going to have a little bit of a difference, but there's probably some, like if you're building an app, you're probably building it in the same way. If you're delivering an infrastructure change to a company, you're probably delivering it. There's probably the same phases, same, milestones. There's a lot of similarities. So setting up templates where you're sort of starting at that point, you can already sort of see what that's going to do to your finances and what it's going to do to your capacity plan as well. And then that lets you say, okay, well, we're starting at this point. We've got a bunch of placeholders. I know this is what I'm going to need. Now I'm going to narrow down, and I know I'm going to need somebody who does JavaScript. So I'm going to start looking for the right resources. So using all those templates can be super powerful. And on the other side, I'm sure it's all happened to every project manager in the world. Sometimes you deliver the best project you've ever delivered. Everything went right. You made the right decisions. You had the right team. You had the right things, and everything sort of hit. Those projects, you need to make them templates. They need to be converted into templates so you can leverage your learnings and your experience and reapply that to the next project that's similar.
So amazing. I love that thinking. Thank you for elaborating on that point. And I can see we've got questions coming in. Thank you so much for those. Feel free to give a thumbs up to the question you would like to be answered during the live session. Also, a heads up that the three of us will be meeting after this live webinar to talk about any questions that we couldn't answer during the live session. So all your questions will be answered either during the live session or in a recording that we will share with you afterwards. So it's very worthwhile sharing your question. So I can see Laura is here. Hi, Laura. It's so wonderful to have you in the audience this time. And Laura is asking, do either of you have any templates you would be able or willing to share for project resourcing demand, for interlock reports, for sales questions? Also, what format do you use for your templates to gather information? That is SharePoint, email, spreadsheet, Smartsheet, forms, etc.
So we did use Smartsheet primarily, and we used that across resourcing and across the PMO. And that's where the templates that we were just talking about, that's where those kind of lived as well. There are just some basic things that I would be happy to share, Nora, with you after that I have documented that you could share
Amazing.
out to the
Yes.
attendees. Just kind of an outline for these are things you should cover in an interlock, right? Here's how you start to build a skills inventory. So I will gather all of those up and get them over to you.
Julie, you're the best. Thank you so much. And thanks, Laura, for
Sure.
asking that brilliant question. Just passing the ball over to you, Lisa. Is there anything you could share?
Absolutely, absolutely. Obviously, we use Run at Run, and I myself discovered Run when I was working for a different company, and I struggled with resource management. And we were using, actually, we were using Asana at the time as a resource project management tool, which is still an excellent project management tool, but the resource management component was really sort of lacking for us. So really went to Run, and Run does obviously offer a lot of templating to help with that kind of procedures. What I would say as well is I have lots of things I can share, obviously. I also had the implementation part of Run. And so we do sort of deep discoveries, and then we sort of try to understand where you're at in terms of your skill, your maturity level in resource management and capacity planning, right? So we have to look at it a little bit more cohesive. So we need to understand, but then we have a lot of ways we can support you. And I'm more than happy to share them, how to create a skills inventory in your company if it doesn't have one, right? How to sort of convert people to become champions of resource management. So managing sort of change management when you're moving from just a PM system to a PM and RM system. So sort of how do you convince people that this is going to be sort of worthwhile? Also, how do you get to streamline some of your projects? Where are the gaps, and how do you make those gaps? How do you fill those gaps to ensure that that's not a repeatable thing that's happening throughout your organization? So a lot of this is sort of covered when we are implementing Run. We sort of design more custom plans for different organizations, but we do have some more generic materials that can be leveraged for pretty much any industry that we're more than happy to share as well.
Brilliant. And I can share the good news that we're happy to send these resources, both from Julie and from Lisa, to everyone who signed up to this webinar. So yeah, we're really here to help the entire resource management community grow and leap forward. So it's a resource for everyone. Thank you both for your answers, and thanks, Laura, for your question. I'm going to pick the next one with 3 thumbs up from Jennifer. Thank you so much for your question. Would love to hear how Julie set up her automated capacity plan and which tool did she use?
Sure. So we moved that into Power BI. We were using OpenAir at the company where I did that. And OpenAir it's a great tool, but a lot of the pieces can be a little clunky. So we decided we needed to do something a little more streamlined and decided to go with Power BI as our main reporting tool. Some of the things we looked at with that was project stage. So we looked at projects that were in process. We looked at projects that were ready to start. We looked at projects that were on hold and looked at not only why were they on hold, but when did we think they were going to come off of hold? And then we also sold projects that were bucket of hour projects. So those were in kind of a retainer project stage. And that was really ad hoc work that a customer would call up and say, hey, I need help for 3 hours this week. Can you do it? And for our on hold and retainer projects, we looked at historical and we looked to see, okay, we have these retainer projects. About how many hours a month are we delivering on those projects, and used that. And then we used, of course, sales pipeline. And one of the other major factors in that was that we looked at the number of hours that were sold in that project, and we kind of guesstimated how long that project was going to take to deliver based on that number of hours. So when we went through all of that, I worked a lot with my data analyst because, truth be told, I am not that technical. And there was a lot of revisions, right? And there was a lot of conversation as to how to get these numbers right. And we were also working at the time across 12 different business units and had to break that down into 12 different capacity numbers by month. So taking all of that and kind of doing some averages, we came up with a pretty accurate model.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's so fascinating. I've not heard this before, so thank you for sharing it.
Sure.
And Jennifer, if you have any follow-up questions on what Julie has shared, feel free to also submit another question.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yes, we've got the next question with 3 thumbs up from Valerie. Thank you for your question, Valerie. How do you overcome the I don't have time to update run and create a culture to get people to use capacity planning? It's an uphill battle. That's a brilliant question, Valerie. I was thinking the same thing. So whoever wants to go first, feel free.
No, I think that's a great question. And I think obviously one of my points earlier on best practices was data, data, data. You've got to have good
Yes.
data, and you've got to really get buy-in from the top, and it has to flow down. So absolutely it can be a challenge to get people to sort of make this a second nature. People are going to log into their PM tools without thinking about it. But then to go back into an ARM tool, they may be less willing. So I think there's a lot of things that I would recommend, but mostly it is, first of all, it's when you're rolling out a tool, you really want to make sure that you are having sort of a change management process that really supports a change in this. So that would be the first step. Once you've already implemented it, and if it's still kind of happening, I think one thing would be to sort of look at why people are struggling to do this. So is it because they just don't have the time? And they're just like, I don't have the time. Well, that's a good question. If they don't have the time, are they over allocated? Are they actually part of an issue that you're sort of trying to solve with resource management is they're not being allocated for internal work, right? So one of the key parts when we're rolling out a system like Run or any float, Smartsheet, whoever is doing this sort of resource management, we always sort of say, what is your target for people working on projects versus internal activities, right? Because you should still be tracking a certain amount of internal time. You should be giving people 20, if they're maybe an engineer, and if they're a project manager, they should be allotted about 30 to 35% would be what I would recommend to give them time to do internal work. And that includes things like updating softwares and making sure that they're keeping the data up to date. So that's one thing I would sort of look at, the ones that are sort of pushing back. The other one is perhaps it is simply not a buy-in on resource management, right? Maybe they're not sure that this is actually helping them. So once again, I'd recommend lots of ways for us to prove the value of resource management, reaching out to whoever is your account manager and asking for additional resources for more concrete use cases to help people sort of buy that in. Something that we did for one of our larger implementations as well, we've done this for the couple of them, is also we offer regular office hours, which means we do sort of open sessions that anybody can attend. That so if somebody is struggling with adding the information in, they can come in, just ask a question, and we can maybe help them out. And then the final one I would also add is looking at your workflows. So really, if there's a specific workflow that you're looking for a specific tool, are those workflows efficient for your organization, right? So when you're sort of rolling out any tool, whether it be resource management, whether it be Canva for design, there's going to be a process of, it comes in, we put this in, there's definitely workflows. And sometimes people, the workflows they create, in context, they're like, yes, this is the right workflow, but in practice, it's too time consuming and it's frustrating for people. Right? So re-looking at that workflow and saying, can we make it more efficient? Can we tone it down? Can we make it something that's just really easy for people to do? And then implementing sort of that change as well. And the best way to do that is, again, ask those people if they're not putting in their information, what's blocking them? Why aren't they doing it? Take their feedback, understand why people are starting to not sort of do it, and then come up with maybe a revised workflow or something that's a little bit more simple, or again, office hours or any of those sorts of things.
Oh, brilliant. Yes to all of that. Amen. And thank you so much, Valerie, for asking that question. Those were some really concrete insights. I can see that there are many questions coming in. That's amazing. Please keep them coming. That's super exciting. We can see you're super engaged, which makes our hearts very happy. Next up, I'm going to choose Jennifer with 3 thumbs up. In your experience, is a centralized RMO best, or is it better to have your resource managers align with the business practices they support? Very good question, Jennifer. Thank you. Who wants to take this one?
I will jump in, and I'm sure that Lisa will have things to add after as well. I think centralized RMO, right, is what resource managers always want. And when we hear that a company wants a centralized RMO, we are all in to do whatever it takes to get us to that point. But I also think it depends on the company and how that's broken down. I think in order to have a great centralized RMO, you also have to have a centralized resource pool. So there has to be cross-training. Many companies, of course, start very siloed, and it's hard to break that. It's all part of that change management process, which is the hardest piece to get through when implementing anything new. So I think if you do a centralized, obviously that's the number one choice. Hybrid would be number two. Decentralized, I would certainly take a step back and ask some questions and say, why do they want to stay with a decentralized model where each team is making its own decisions and kind of operating independently as a bunch of independent little companies? I also think that, in order to get them to understand the benefits of moving to hybrid and then to fully centralized, you have to do a lot of education. I found a lot of companies have never worked with resource management, so they don't really understand all the pieces it impacts across an organization. They don't really understand what we do as resource managers. So investing that time in the front will make the change management process easier.
That's amazing. And could you just elaborate on the hybrid model and how that would play out?
So that would be maybe where you have a resource manager, resourcing team that might be updating allocations. They might be maintaining a skills inventory, but they might not be making the decisions as to who gets assigned to projects. Or they might be deciding on a PM, but not the technical team. And you have other people within delivery, maybe project managers, that are actually making those decisions as to who that delivery team's going to be.
Nice. Thank you so much for explaining the hybrid model. Lisa, I'm sure there's something you could add.
Oh, I think Julie sort of nailed the answer. I think the only thing I would add would be simply that it is also based on your maturity level in terms of resource management. And so if you are very mature and you've got this down and your skills are all aligned and you're collecting all kinds of data points and you're really making an RMO is the only way you're going to be able to survive, like the only way to do it. But if you're at the start of your resource management journey, it's something that your organization's like, we probably need this. We need to start implementing this. An RMOs really might not be the initial step you want to take. It is also just about maybe resourcing it based more on the business units as well. So that will make it a little bit more personal. And the reality is when you have sort of resource managers for specific business units, they may know a little bit more about the actual needs and may be better at predicting and forecasting what will be needed because they know their unit, right? So if I'm planning for customer success or sales, I know that department really well. But if I'm asked to suddenly also resource and forecast and know what's going to happen in the engineering team, I'm at a bit more of a loss, right? So when you're sort of building out that function, makes sense to perhaps do it a bit of the hybrid model where you probably are doing it more by business unit. You may have some people that are maintaining skills inventories across the board. But as you grow and you become more efficient in the way you're resourcing, you really do need to look at an RMO. It's really the only way that you can sort of nail all of it in one place. So that would be all I would add to that.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like we could even dedicate a whole webinar to that topic. So thank you both for your concise answers. Wonderful. Let's see which other question we can answer. I guess we have time for a few more. I'm going to choose Vivian with her question. With a plethora of AI tools out there, I'd love to gain some insights on how we can integrate AI into resource management processes to boost efficiency. And maybe Vivian, just as a heads up, just last month, we've had the pleasure of dedicating a whole webinar on the possibilities of AI for resource management specifically. So this might be also interesting for you to check out, but I'm also very curious to pick your brains. So Julie, maybe what are your thoughts on integrating AI into resource management processes?
Sure. So I think there's some anxiety, right, around AI and resource management. And I think that in a lot of cases, it's the elephant in the room. Is it going to replace what we do? No would be my answer. There's too many factors that need that human touch, that AI just can't provide. Where I think it is very useful is maybe in scanning an SOW to pull those skills out, to make it easier to identify what's needed for us to do a skills match. It could even go so far as to match skills out of your skills inventory to that SOW. to kind of get it narrowed down to what people you should be looking at. And then you can take that human piece over from there, right? And you can say, here's their availability. Do they have the soft skills to do this as well? Are they really the right person to work with that team and with the customer?
Nice. So for skills matching, that's a concrete use case. Lisa, what else do you see?
I agree with Julie. I don't think it's going to replace a lot of the resource management, because at the end of the day, again, resources, it's people, right? So there has to be a human component to managing people. That's always going to be. But I do see AI sort of, and I'd say in a couple of years, I think it's going to be across all resource management systems. More for me, the way I see it is more of a co-pilot, right? Because what it can do is exactly what Julie's recommending is make a good recommendation, match skills, identify people that might be the right resource. They can give you sort of a good starting point and say to you, this, if you want to run this project, this is going to be your gaps. So I think it can be a really good, effective help in sort of, again, a co-pilot aspect of helping you get to those points where there might be some automation that can help you, but at the end of the day, you're still going to probably need a human to review and revise and make sure that you're factoring in things like what Julie's saying is like, clients, right? At the end of the day, we're delivering services to people, and clients have particular needs, particular personalities. They may work in certain ways, and AI is just not at that level yet where it can understand that they're going to need some very chatty engineers on this project because that's what the client wants, right? There's just not going to be able to factor in that level, while the PM or CSM will be able to say to you, like, no matter what, you want to be putting somebody that's comfortable meeting with the client a lot because they like to meet, right? So that kind of thing is always going to remain sort of separate. But I think the part of the suggestions and matching and sort of forecasting is definitely going to you're going to start seeing AI have a huge impact in the RM world.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'm feeling a lot of excitement coming from you rather than the need to be worried. So how can it complement what the resource manager is already doing, make it easier to do great quality work for the business? So that's very uplifting. Thank you both. Resonates a lot. Jennifer has the next question. Does Lisa have suggested standards for percentage of admin internal time by different roles? Great question, Jennifer. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Julie probably could answer this one as well. There are definitely some recommendations that we have. And again, it depends on the industry and it depends on the role. So what I would say is for certain industries, like if you're looking at a digital space, we would actually make a recommendation that you're going to be looking at about 80% utilization for your engineers, for example, but you want to keep your PMs probably more along the line of 65 to 70%. So we will, we obviously, it depends on which industry, but on the other hand, for a pharmaceutical company, for example, we may actually allot a lot more time for internal work for that PM level because they're going to probably be stuck in a lot more meetings and there's a lot more discussion and movement in projects. And then we may say, for those kinds of roles, you're looking to maybe limit people to, 65%. On the other hand, we'll also see some where they're a small organization, they've been doing this for a long time, and all of a sudden you can say, you know what, you can probably survive on a 90% utilization, billable utilization for this specific role. So it does actually vary per industry. If you're at sort of the start of your journey with this and you're kind of looking for recommendation, reach out to us because we can give you guys some generic standards that we have, not just from our own research or RMI Institute research, but also just based on our own experience of what we're seeing clients in specific industries, what they're kind of targeting for those billable utilization versus internal work.
Amazing. Thanks for that offer. And Julie, keen to pick your brain as well.
Sure. So all of those things, yes. I think those numbers are pretty consistent with what I see as well for utilization goals. The other piece of that we always factor in are those productive pieces. Are you working on doing that cross training? And where are you at with that training? Because certainly that is skill building and you want to make sure people get credit for the work they're doing. The other piece of that is internal. How many internal meetings do they have? And I think all of those things need to be factored in and definitely taken into consideration when you're setting those goals and looking at how productive people need to be.
Yes, absolutely resonates. Thank you both very much. Feel free to use these last few minutes to capture any questions in the Q&A as we're slowly coming to an end of the live session. We will definitely answer all of the remaining questions. Plus, I also have some questions in the backlog, so we will take a recording after this live session, and we will share the recording along with all the resources that we have promised to everyone who signed up, and you're most welcome to share it with anyone who might benefit from all of these resources as well. So with that, both of you, just a big thank you for being so generous and sharing your time, your energy, your knowledge, your expertise with us. It has been an incredibly exciting and insightful conversation. And I hope to our audience that you took so much away from what we have covered today. Please feel free to share it on LinkedIn, tag Run, tag us, connect with Julie, Lisa, myself, and Run. We would love to hear from you. And just as a little sneak peek, we've got some exciting news in regards to the next LEAP webinar. We will dive into the topic of operations. And we will dive into how to elevate operations with effective resource management. We will be joined by two wonderful speakers, Nicola Armstrong and Nicole Tiefensee. So please join us for that session. We would love to see you there. And again, everyone, a big thank you. It's been so nice to have so many people join us today. Thank you for all of your questions. Thank you, Julie and Lisa. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.